All right, so thank you for joining us today. We're going to be going through some bits and bobs in Adobe Illustrator. So I've got a little list of things that I'd like to go through that I think will help you guys with your print and cut processes. So hopefully some of these are going to be quite useful. I am going to go through fairly quickly rather than stopping and repeating lots along the way. As this session is going to be recorded, you will be able to watch back should you need to relook at any of the parts as we go along. So first of all, hopefully you guys can see my Illustrator screen here. I've got a number of different documents open at the top here, which we're going to go through. First of all, we're going to talk through navigation a little bit. So I'm just going to chuck on a picture here, and there's a few key shortcuts that I tend to use whilst in the program to be able to quickly navigate around the screen. So one of them would be to zoom. Okay, so when you're zooming in and out, I tend to use the scroll wheel on my mouse and the Alt key. If you hold the Alt key and use the scroll wheel, you can zoom in and out around where your cursor is. So if I move my cursor and scroll in and out, it will move where my cursor is placed. So that's a really quick and easy way of zooming in and out. Alternatively, if you do just want to jump in and out in stages, you can hold the Control key, shown in red here, and the plus or minus keys. So if I do that, plus or minus, again, it's just going to zoom in or out. So nice quick little shortcuts for moving around, well, for zooming in on the screen. Secondly, a very handy one when you are zoomed in or zoomed out is to use the pan tool. So the pan tool is the space bar, and then clicking with the left button on your mouse. So if I click the space bar and then move around, I can drag the screen around as well. So if I'm zoomed in, so Alt again, scroll in and out, I can then pan using the pan tool, and then I can scroll in and out, which is a really handy way of moving around the document. Both of those options as well will not disturb or take away from the tool that you're currently using. Notice if I press the space bar, the pan hand comes up, and then if I let it go, it goes back to my existing tool that I was using. So that's quite handy as well when you're in the middle of, for example, drawing a path or something like that. Otherwise, I've got the I've got Illustrator set up how I tend to use it at the moment. You can see some of the windows and things open on the right-hand side. I've got the main properties window, which is part of Illustrator CC. It's one of the reasonably new additions to the software, so you may not have that if you're using an older window, but if I select something, the properties window will pop up with relevant options for the process that I'm in the middle of. So if I go to the text tool, it will come up with text options and so on. So that's a really handy window. Personally, I like to have my swatches available at the top. I've got my Roland swatches as well, so my Roland VersaWorks swatches and my Roland Color Systems library swatches as well, because I use those a lot when I'm working with my Roland print or print and cut device. The Pathfinder, which we're going to talk through in a bit. Stroke and transparency I find quite useful to have open. And then, of course, your layers down the bottom here. And you can see I've got 4 different layers here because I just had some of these items split up on different layers. So any of the items that you see in Illustrator as well, if you hover over any of the menus, what you'll see is on the right-hand side, the shortcut option for that as well. So some of the basic ones would be Control-C for copy or Control-V for paste. I tend to find that often when you're doing work for print and cut that you also want to paste it in the same place that you copied it from. So a little tip there, instead of using Control-V, if you do Control-F or Shift Control-V, it will place it in front or in place of where you copied it from. So that's really handy when you're pasting between layers to get duplicates as well. So those are just a few of the main functions that I'm going to be using for panning around these screens during this demo, and hopefully those will be useful for you as well. Okay, next we've got a document here where I'm going to talk about bleed and choke. So all I've done in this document is create some text at the top here, and I'm just going to show you a very basic way of creating a bleed onto your shape, text, whatever it might be. Bleed's very useful for when you're doing print and cut jobs so that you can make the print area a little bit bigger so that your cut line sits within the print. This should get rid of any sort of white hairlines and things should your cut move at all from your print. So a very useful process. So what I'm going to do here is, this text is actually text at the moment, editable text. So if I double click, I can go into the text and I can edit it. I don't want to do that, so I'm just going to go back to my selection tool. The shortcut for the selection tool is V. a very handy tool to know because it's just above the space bar as well. So when I'm panning, I can always go back to my select tool. I'm just going to select this text. What I'm going to do is right click to access a quick access menu. And I'm going to go to create outlines here. That's going to change my text from being editable text to being shapes. You don't have to do that all the time, but in this example, it makes it a lot easier. So now I've got my text. What I could do is just pop the cut line as the stroke on the outside of my text. If I do that, the cut line is going to be directly on top of the edge of where the color is. So what I want to do is actually offset the path a bit, and then I'm going to add the cut line afterwards myself. So I tend to work in layers as well, which we'll come to on the next little session. But what I'm going to do first of all is go to edit in the edit menu. Oh, sorry, object path, okay, and then offset path down there. This is a really quick and easy tool. You just click that box and it comes up with a dialog box to give you some options. I'm just going to enter a value. I'm going to go for 2 millimeters to start, and we'll take a look and see whether that's going to be viable by hitting the preview button there. And what you should hopefully see on the screen is that I've got an inner blue line here. It's blue because the layer that I'm working in is blue. And I've got an outer line that's 2 millimeters away from the existing one. That looks about right for me for this kind of size design. So I'm just going to click on OK. Now it's a bit tricky to see because these are black. What I could do is I could swap the fill for the stroke on both of these. And what you should see now is that you can see my offset path. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually change the color. I'm just going to create this outside path. First of all, I'm going to ungroup them, sorry. What I'm going to do is select the outside paths, and I'm going to fill these with red, just so we can see them stand out a little bit more. And then the inside ones I'm going to fill red as well. This means that at the moment you can't actually see the offset that I've created. But what I'm going to do is select the inside shapes now, and for the stroke I'm going to select my cut contour. So now if I zoom in, you'll see that my cut contour is sat 2 millimeters inside of the outline. I actually don't need that that black stroke on the outside text. So what I'm going to do is I could just individually select each of these bits of text, but in order to select anything with the same appearance, there's a nice handy little tool that you can get up here on your control bar. So on the end here, there's one that says start editing similar shapes together. If I go to the drop down list, oh no, sorry, the next one, select similar shapes. If I go to that one and I say select same stroke color, that's going to select everything in my design that's got a black outline, because those are the ones that I wanted to edit. And now I can turn off the black outline. So now you can see I've got my cut contour sat 2 millimeters inside my text, which is effectively giving me a bleed, but it means that my original cut line is the same size as it was originally when I created the text. So I'm not editing the actual cut line, I'm just expanding the color behind it. Okay, so if I just go through that process again a moment, we'll just do it quickly down here. So I'm going to create some text, and this time we're going to create a choke, which is putting the cut line inside of the text. So I'm just going to edit the font. We'll go back to a nice chunky font. Let's go for this one. So, oh, same one. So we've got a nice chunky font. Same thing. I'm going to right click and go to create outlines. I'm just going to choose a different color for this one. Let's go with green. And what I'm going to do is the same process. So object, path, offset path. This time I'm going to put -2. Okay. And if we hit the preview, you can see again that cut line is going to come inside. So what I've done is created a shape inside, and for the stroke of that one, I'm going to add my cut line. So this way, instead of making the color bigger with the cut line inside, what we've done is keep the color the same and put the cut line inside. That might be useful for, say, for example, I wanted to put a white underlay on this, but I didn't want the white to go all the way to the edge. Then instead of putting the cut line, what I could do is for the fill of this one, select my white spot color. And as you can see, I've now got white inside the shape, creating a choke on the text. So hopefully you could follow that bit. It was pretty quick. As I said, we're going to whiz through some of these. But what we've done is created a bleed on the top example and a choke on the bottom example. and we put a cut line inside our shape. And that works for multiple shapes, multiple items as well. You can get lots of them together and then create your bleed from that. All right. Next up, we're going to jump onto another design. I've got a design here that I created for a t-shirt. We've got a surfer riding a wave, and it says Summer Surf Camp 2018. Now, before we jump into this, I'd just like to ping out a quick poll to you guys, see if you can answer this for me. Do you name your layers? This is my poll. Just a moment, let's get that going. So what I'm going to do with this design is talk through how I use layers to separate my artwork and make it easier for people to be able to come into a design and see how it's being built. It also makes it much easier for sort of turning off and on information and being able to see what's going on inside a design. So if you guys don't mind just selecting that bit there. So what have we got coming in? 63% of you are saying yes. 6% no, 31% say I don't use layers. All right, so we'll just wait a couple more seconds, then we'll close that off. So we've got 80% of you have voted. There we go, a couple more, brilliant. Okay, we'll close it off. So, you know, that's 30% of you are not using layers, which is quite interesting. Let's just go back to Illustrator. Layers are really important. I mean, I know that whenever you create information, it automatically creates sub-layers within a layer. But what I'm going to do is just pull out my my layer window here. I'm just going to see if I can make the view bigger. Panel options, large. There we go. So we just made that a little bit bigger so you guys can see that a bit easier. And what we've got here, if I just move this to the side, is I've broken down this design into 5 different layers. So I'm going to turn them off and turn them on one by one now. So my base layer, I've created a flood that goes underneath the whole of the design using the Roland's white spot color. So that whole area that you can see there in gray is going to print with white ink on my device. I've then got a layer which is a bleed of the actual design. So as I just showed you in that previous example, I merged all the shapes together and then created a bleed of a light blue color. Next on my layers, I've got my color layer. So if I turn off the others, you'll be able to see this. This is the main color of the design. So we've got a couple of different blues, purple and black. Okay, and that's all on one single layer. Turn the others back on. We've then got the text, which sits within this bleed that I've created. And finally, I've got my cut information on the top. If I just zoom in a little bit here, you should be able to see that my cut sits within my my bleed color, which is this light blue one that I created, which means that actually I've just got a single cut line that runs all the way around the outside of my design, which makes it much easier for weeding or for adding to a t-shirt. But we've also got white ink in the background on this one. This is really useful because if I didn't want to have a cut line, all I can do is just turn off the eye symbol on my cut layer and then export the image again, meaning that it wouldn't have the cut information within it. So, or say for example, I did just want the cut information, I could turn off the other ones and I could just export the cut layer as well. So it's much easier to be able to turn everything off in these layers. What I've also done is name my layers. So if you double click on a layer or go to the drop down list, you can go to rename. But what I'm going to do is just double click and it comes up with the options for that layer. So this one I've called cut, but I could call it cut contour, for example. And there we go. You can see that all my layers are built up in there. So I've created base layers so that if somebody else comes into my design, they can see what's going on. But if you go into the sub layers as well, if you click on this little arrow next to your layers, it will then show me what's inside of those layers. So if we go to the text, actually all of this text has been grouped. So if I select it, you can see it selects all of the text in one go. So down here, I can see that there's a group. I could even name that group if I wanted to as well. So we could call that Summer Surf Camp or whatever we want. If we go down to the little drop arrow again though, now I can see in my layers all the different bits of text in individual parts. So when you're in a sub layer, you can use the eye symbol to turn them off. There you can see I'm turning on and off the A in camp. And also, if I select this little selection box circle on the right hand side, I will just select that individual piece within my layer or my group. So at the moment I'm within a group and I've just selected the A. if we come out of here, let's jump into another part. If we go down to the bleed, you can see that there's actually 3 shapes within the bleed. And let's go back into that color layer because I've grouped all of the colors. So what I'm just going to do is turn off the other layers a minute so we can just see the color layer. And if I select it, because it's a group, it's selected the whole group. So there's 2 different ways, or a couple of different ways, but 2 basic ways of being able to select a single item within this. So as I said, either drop down into the group and then go to the selection, find my surfer, just select my surfer, as you can see there, Control Z to undo, just select my surfer. Another way is to go out of your group and to select your group, and if you double click on an item, you enter something called isolation mode. So if I want to enter into my group, watch what happens if I double click within my surfer. What's happened is the rest of the screen has kind of grayed out, and at the top here, I've got this gray bar which shows me that I've entered isolation mode. In my layer as well, it's just showing me the layer that I'm working within, which is my sort of surfer color group, and it says isolation mode. Now if I make any changes, so let's say I want to move my surfer a little bit, and then I come out of isolation mode by pressing either escape or double clicking outside of my area. It's now still a group, but my surfer's moved within that group. So that's another way of using your layers, or using something called isolation mode. Sometimes when you're not paying attention, you might double click and accidentally enter isolation mode as well. But you can tell by that gray bar along the top there. And then escape on my keyboard to come out of that. So layers are really important, especially if you work in a place where other people use your design files. It can mean that you can label everything, and it means it's much clearer for somebody else to be able to come in and amend your design or whatever that might be. Another useful tool is if you are designing for, say, UV print, you can add like gloss layers, or if you've got white in your machine, then you can add white information as well, as I have done here, and put that on a separate layer. Okay, so that's a quick little run through of layers. And next we're going to jump over onto logo shapes. So this layer that I've created here, I'm just going to pop my layer window now back where it was. If you see that when I'm moving something around on the screen here, if a blue line pops up, that means that's where I'm going to move that window to. So I've got my layers window now put back into its sort of dock on the right hand side. If any of these windows aren't open, you can just go to the window tab at the top and select any of them here. So you can see that layers is selected because it's open on my right hand side here. Right, next we're going to talk through the Pathfinder tool. So I've got my Pathfinder tool open down here. Again, whilst we use this demo, what I'm going to do is just pull that out into the main window so you guys can see it. And again, we might be able to do, oh no, we can't make the little window bigger, but you guys can see all the shapes there. So I'm going to use these shapes down the bottom here to talk through some of the different options for Pathfinder. So these are basically tools for minusing, subtracting, adding, intersecting multiple shapes. And I'll show you how it can be really useful for creating cut lines and things in a minute. So the first option here, if you hover over it, it says Unite. So if I select these 2 shapes here, I've got a red square and a yellow circle. The yellow circle is on top of the red square. If I select both of them and select that first option, it merges the 2 together, or unites them to create one shape. So that was that first option. The second option, again, another really useful one, tend to use the first 2 the most myself, is minus front. So whichever shape is on top of the other one, it's going to use that as a sort of cutter to stamp out from the bottom one. So minus front from the back. So if I click that, what you should see happen is the yellow circle disappears and it's taken a chunk out of that red square as well. Let's have a look at some of the other ones. So again, if I select this one's going to give us the intersect between the 2 shapes. So if I click that, we get a little yellow cheese wedge there of the overlapping areas. The opposite of that as well would be to take away the overlap. Now, whichever layer was on top, what you might have noticed there is that the red square became yellow because the yellow shape was on top. So it's taken that as the preferred color. Down the bottom here, we even have divide. So I've divided them, but if I select it, they're still in a group. So what I'm going to do is right click and go to ungroup. And now if I pull them apart, you can see it's created separate shapes out of all of the overlapping sections. There are other ones here as well. We don't need to go through all of them. Have a little play around is what I'd recommend. And obviously, as I said, if you hover over them, it does give you the different options that are there. So using the Pathfinder tool, what I'm going to do is just open up another layer I've got here. What I've done here is just create a little design, very, very basic, that's got that red and yellow shapes, some text saying logo, and a green rectangle. So let's imagine that this is somebody's design that they want to have print and cut as a sticker, for example. Now, creating the cut line for this, the easiest way for me to do this would be to use the Pathfinder tool, merge all of those shapes together to give me the outline of the whole lot, and then just select the cut line for that. So the way I'm going to do that myself is I actually still want the design. So what I'm going to do is duplicate the information that I have here. Now, if you remember at the beginning, I said that you can copy, so Control C or Edit Copy. What I'm going to do is create a new layer, because this one's going to become my cut layer. So I'm going to call it Cut. And then what I'm going to do is, just because this is nice and easy for you guys to see, is I'm going to turn off my other layers. So at the moment, I've just got a new layer called Cut with no information in it. So I'm going to go to Edit, Paste in Place, which means it's going to place it exactly where I copied it from in the other layer. And what I'm going to do is, just out of my preferences, I'm always going to create an outline from my text. And then I'm going to select the whole lot of these shapes, and I'm going to use that first option, Unite. And what you can see is that's given me a black shape, because black was my top layer of all of that design. Now all I need to do is swap the fill for the stroke. So you can see now I've just got an outline of my design. And instead of it being black, I'm going to choose my cut, contour, Roland swatch over here. Just a quick note on that, good practice as well when you're creating your cut lines is to keep your stroke weight at 0.25. Okay, so if I zoom in now, you should be able to see, here's my cut lines for my different parts of my design. And what I can do now is go back to my layers, and I'll turn on my initial color layer, which I called logo over here. And as we can see, if I zoom in, my cut line surrounds my design all the way around. So that's a very quick and handy way of creating a cut contour around the parameters of a design. Okay, so hopefully that all made sense. Again, going pretty quick here, so hope you guys are keeping up or taking notes as well, but as I said, the video will be available as well. Next up, we're going to look at clipping masks. So a clipping mask is again like a stamp. So what you can do is use paths or shapes to sort of stamp out a picture or another group of shapes if you wanted to. So what I've done here is I've placed the same image twice, just to talk through a little bit about a clipping mask and something called a compound path as well. So on this image on the left-hand side, hopefully you guys can see there, what we've got is a picture of some lips, and on the outline there, I've created a path that runs around the outside of the lips. We're going to come to the pen tool in a bit so I can show you how I did that. And the path I've created in green, just so you guys can see that, because it should stand out nicely against the background. And in order to stamp that out, what I'm going to do is select that shape. First of all, I'm going to create a copy of it, and I'll show you why in a minute. So let's go to Edit, Copy. That's my outline shape. I need to make sure that my shape is on top of my image as well. Now what I'm going to do is drag a little selection arrow over both of these to select both of them. And if I right click on my mouse, that's a quick access menu, and it says Make Clipping Mask. If I select that, you see what happens. It's just stamped out the rest of the image. So now I'm just left with the lips there without any of that background part. If I go to the View tab at the top here and go to Outline Mode, what you'll see is that box around the outline. That means that the image is still there. It's just I've created something called a clipping mask, like a viewing window in front of that picture. So now if I go View, back to GPU Preview, now we can see it properly. Now the reason I copied that outline is because now what I could do is go to Edit, Paste in Place. That's my green outline. And what I could now do is swap the outline for a cut contour make it 0.25. And again, if I zoom in, what you can see is that sort of magenta hairline, which is my cut line, running all the way around the outside of my design. Again, if I wanted to create a little bit of a choke or bleed, what I would have done is just change my initial clipping mask. Or what I could do if we just went back to the beginning was go Object, Path, Offset Path, and let's just go -1. Let's preview. That's quite a lot, so I'm actually going to go to -0.5 and then delete the original cut line. And if we zoom in here, hopefully you guys can see there, my cut line is now a tiny bit inside the outside clipping mask, which means I've effectively got a bit of a bleed there as well. So that's something called a clipping mask. Again, really useful for getting rid of that background area so I don't have to print it, saving me on money and media size. And it means that I don't have to jump over into Photoshop, for example, to be able to get rid of the background. I can do it within Illustrator as well. Next up, I've got the same image on the right-hand side here, but this time I've got two different paths. So I've got a path in the middle here, which is the inside of the mouth, and then I've got a path around the outside as well. Now this time what I want to do is just have the lips. So I want to take out the teeth as well. So what I need to do first of all is select these two paths, so my outer path and the inside path. So I'm just going to hold my Shift key on my keyboard and select the inside path as well. And I need to right click again to access my quick access menu and go to Make Compound Path. Effectively what this is doing is, imagine you've got two circles, one on top of the other. Instead of just having two circles, it's going to create a donut. So the two shapes are merged to become one shape. Now if I select the background image and my new compound path, this time if I right click and go to Make Clipping Mask, it's going to take away the teeth as well, because it's used that compound path to create the stamp rather than just a single shape. Again, that can be very useful for taking out specific parts of an image if you wanted to. And again, what I could have done is copied that original shape, stuck it on another layer, and then had my cut information on a separate layer from that image cut out as well. All right. So that was a quick introduction to clipping masks and the compound path. Next, what we're going to do is jump over into gradients. So what I've got here is a bunch of different gradients that I've created, and I just want to use these to explain the differences. And one of the benefits of me doing this, hopefully, will be that if you do use special colors, such as white, metallic, or gloss for UV design, then this should help you out a little bit to help understand how these work. So this top box was just a rectangle. Let's just clear that a moment. It's just a rectangle. And all I've done is, I don't have my gradient tool open. So I just need to pop up here, go to Window, Gradient. So there's my gradient tool. I selected the default gradient, which is a gradient going from white to black. So as you can see here, I've got a gradient going from white to black. Now, because my artboard is white, on this left-hand side, I can't really see that it's white because there's a white background as well. If I just move this up a little bit, now you should be able to see, because it's against the grey background, that it's white on the left-hand side and black on the right-hand side. Below it, I've created another gradient. This one, if I select my gradient tool over here, you can see it goes from yellow to red. If I press the key G on my keyboard, or go up to somewhere up here will be my gradient menu. Can't remember where it is. I just know the shortcut is G. So if I press G on my keyboard, can you see that bar that's come up in the middle of my gradient? This is the same bar as the bar that's over here in the gradient tab. So what I can do is, if I grab this little diamond shape on the top here, I can move where the gradient blend is. So I could have more yellow or less yellow, more red, whatever I want. And I can also do that on the actual design over here as well. And you see it's updating as I pull that slider. Using that bar from where I've pressed G in the main display here, I could also rotate my gradient. So I could have an angled gradient if I wanted to. And I can actually move the red point as well. So if I just undo that, I could move the red point and move the gradient up that way as well. So nice and handy and quick way of creating gradients. You can also add colors. So if I click into my gradient slider over here in the gradient tool, I can create extra links. Oh, if I drag a color in, so let's try and drag another color in. Let's drag green into this. So we're going to drag green into the middle now. Now you can see that I've got two gradient sliders. I've got the one going from yellow to green, and then I've got the one going from green to red over here as well. So again, just a very quick overview of the gradient tool. And to get rid of that bar in the middle there, again, I'm just going to press G on my keyboard, or press go back to V, my select tool, to go back to my selection. Now down the bottom here, these gradients are slightly different. They look exactly the same on the screen, I imagine. Here's one that's going from white to gray, and here's one that's going from white to gray. They're not actually going to gray, they're going to the Roland spot color for white. And at the moment, they look exactly the same, but they are different. And the easiest way for me to show you that would be to move them or copy them over here to the side. And in order to create a copy like that, you just drag the item and hold the Alt key on your keyboard. That creates a copy of something. Another little shortcut there. Now you can see that one of them goes from CMYK white to Roland spot color white. The other one goes from nothing to the Roland spot color white. Okay, so if I actually printed these, the top one would print slightly different to the bottom one. So what I wanted to do is create what's called a transparency on this bottom one. So if I select this and go over to my gradient slider tool here, you can see that on the left-hand side one, it's filled with a solid spot color white, same as the right-hand side one. The way I did that was just to grab the white spot color and drag it onto the circle to change its color. But on one side, I've changed the opacity to 0%. On the other side, it's 100%. So this gradient is going from 0% white ink to 100% white ink. This can be quite cool for creating effects and things, for window graphics, or, well, anything, I guess. So that's a quick little introduction to the standard gradients. Just as a final little top off to this, I'm just going to show you a quick tool for doing radial gradients as well. So if I again go to my gradient tool over here and I select the default gradient, which is white to black. In my options for the gradient, I can change the type from being a linear gradient, from it going from black to white that way, to a radial gradient. Now you can see it's white in the middle and it's black on the outside. I could flip that by pressing this little button here to go from black to white. But I think I prefer it looking this way, where it also almost makes it look 3D, that shape there. Again, if I press G on my keyboard, the options come up. And again, I can slide my gradient to change as I see fit. I want to have it about there. And what I could also do is change the ellipse of the shape as well. So if I pull that down, you can see that I'm kind of changing the shape, and I can make it bigger or smaller than the actual shape. But I want to leave it at the same size. This is another useful tool for when you're using your special colors to create a shape, to get a nice gradient effect as well. I will just quickly cover that shortcut that I used again there, just because it can be very useful for you. So here's another quick little handy tool for when you're moving things around. What I'm going to do is just move this circle up here, and I'm going to make it a little bit smaller by holding the Shift key whilst I'm moving it, and I'm going to click it and I'm going to move it over to the side, but I'm going to hold Shift and the Alt key. Shift makes it move to the right hand side on exactly the same plane, and the Alt key creates a copy. So all I've done there is just create a copy of something. Anywhere you move it, holding the Alt key, it creates a copy. It's nice and useful. And another quick and handy one, whilst we're on sort of shortcuts and tips, let's just delete that one, is if I move this and hold the Shift and the Alt key, if I wanted to then do the same action again, I can go to Object, Transform, Transform again. Or if I select it and right click, I can go to Transform and Transform again. Or the shortcut there is Control D. So I'm going to use the shortcut. I'm going to click it and I'm going to press Control D. and it's just going to do the same action again and again and again. So as you can see, I can quickly, if I wanted to, create a grid of these. Again, Shift and Alt, I'm going to come up now and then press it again and again. And I've quickly created a nice grid of these shapes. So another little handy tool when you're moving around in Illustrator. All right, that's gradients. Next, we're going to move on to the pen tool. The pen tool, I do, again, have a very quick survey I just wanted to pop up. Let's have a quick look. All right, let's pop that up a minute and see if you guys use the pen tool. So do you feel comfortable drawing with the pen tool? Yes, I'm a drawing wizard. No, I don't understand it. Basic use, yes, but would like to learn more. Or what's the pen tool are your options? So let's have a quick look. 25%, yes, I'm a wizard. Good on you. Oh no, that's gone. Oh yeah, it's going up and down. Here we go. Let's see if we can get you all voting on this one. 77% basic use, but would like to learn more. That tends to be the norm when you mention the pen tool to people. It's a bit of a tricky tool. Oh, there we go. So we've got 80% now saying they would like to learn more, not so many as a wizard. What I'm going to do is just show you a few tips on using the pen tool that you may or may not know about. And I've found them really useful whenever I'm creating cut lines for my designs. So let's just close off that poll a moment. And let's go back to Illustrator. Here we go. So first of all, just a very quick introduction to the tool. So I'm just going to zoom into this bit of white space here, and we'll come back to those shapes in a minute. And I'm just going to select the pen tool over here. The shortcut for the pen tool is P on my keyboard. So if I just press the P key, it brings up the pen tool. And if I hover over the pen tool, or sorry, hold it down with my mouse, it gives me a couple of other options. So it says anchor point tool as well, which is another option that you have within the pen tool. And you can also pop that out as another little window if you wanted to. So I'm in the pen tool, and first of all, I'm just going to turn off my fill of my shape, because when you're drawing, it's normally easier to see what you're drawing if you turn off the fill and just have the stroke selected. You can always pop the fill back in afterwards. So I'm going to turn off the fill down here in my on the bottom left of my window here. And what I'm going to do is click and click again and click again and click again. What you can see is with my pen tool, I've created 4 different sort of nodes, connection points, and they've drawn together with a straight line. Very basic use of the pen tool. If I hold the Shift key, you can see that I can only draw in 45-degree or 90-degree angles. And you can see the preview line snapping to that shape. You can turn any of these options off and change them as well, but this is the default. And if I click and I keep the mouse button held down and I move away from the point, I start to create curves. Okay, and the curves, again, if I hold Shift, I can keep the control arms coming out of this point perpendicular to the point, or angles, which can be very useful as well. And if I then go to click another point, not touching the mouse at the moment, but if I move the mouse, you can see this preview arm, which is showing me where the next point is going to go, which is very useful when you're going to be drawing around shapes and things, trying to create your cut lines. So if I click again, and if I pull the arm again, then I'm creating more of an advanced curve. And you can see now I'm just creating lots of different curves by drawing that point as we go around. If I'm finished, I can always just press either V to go back to the selection tool or escape to exit the tool. So I'm going to go back to V, and there we go. I've created a very basic line. Now I'm going to delete that. And next up, we're going to move over to this circle. I'm just going to lock the layer below, which has got all these images on, so it's a little bit easier for me to work with because I'm on top of this layer. So I'm not going to be able to select this. I'm going to go back to my pen tool, and this time I'm going to try and draw around this circle. So what I'm going to do is start right on the far edge. And you can see that my line is just snapping to the anchor point that's already there. So I'm cheating a little bit because I'm drawing over an existing circle, but all you want to do is get right the way onto one side. Now this time, if I'm not just going to click and then let go, I'm going to click and hold down, and I'm going to hold the Shift key on my keyboard, and I'm going to move my control arms up. What that means is that my initial point has got a curve coming out of it. Next, I'm going to use my space bar to pan up a little bit, and I'm going to go up to the top of my circle. Again, same thing. I'm going to click, hold the shift button, and pull away. And you can see that my curve now perfectly matches that top left-hand corner of the circle. I'm going to do the same again. Come down here. I'm going to click, hold down, hold the shift key to create a nice curve coming in and out of my line. What we'll see is if we zoom in, the arm, these control arms that are coming out the top and out the bottom of my point, the one on top controls the curve coming in, and the one on the bottom controls the curve coming out. Because they're at opposite ends, my line is going to go through my point at 180 degrees. So it's going to come out at the opposite side to the way it went in. So what I'm going to do now is just draw the bottom one. Again, hold the shift key, pull that out, go back up to the top, and finish my circle. And if I just make that line a little bit thicker, what you can see is I've drawn a nice black circle that should be more or less a perfect circle. So that was just using the shift key and holding down the mouse. Now, this one's going to be a little bit trickier because I've got in the top there, I've got a V shape. So I need my shape to come in, and I need the line to not come out at 180 degrees, but to come back on itself. And I'll show you a way of doing that now. So again, I'm going to go back to the pen tool. I'm going to start at the bottom here, and I'm going to click on that anchor point. And my first node that I'm going to draw is going to be right over on the as far on the left-hand side as I can get here. And I'm going to click, and I'm going to start drawing that curve. So I'm going to go up perpendicular to the line. And I'm going to do this reasonably roughly, but there we go. So we've got the first part of the line. As you can see, my exit curve is going through at 180 degrees, and it's going to follow that curve back around. So now I'm going to go up to this point in the middle here and fill in that left-hand side of my heart. There we go. Now, before I let go of the mouse here, I'm going to hold the Alt key on my keyboard, and that's going to enable me to change the exit arm that's coming out of that node. So if you watch, if I move at the moment, both of the arms are moving at the same time. But if I hold the Alt key, I can just move the exit one. And I'm going to put that opposite the other one. And now you can see that my exit curve is coming out the same as it did on the other arm. There we go. And back down to the end. Oh, didn't quite finish that one off there. There we go. Let's get that arm up. There we go. So now I've drawn that heart shape by going back on myself, by editing the exit curve by using the Alt key. Hope that made sense for you guys. What I will do is just show you a couple of other quick versions of this as well. So if I delete that curve, some of the other pen tools, if I go P again on my keyboard and go back to the pen tool, let's say that I do want to click on this bottom node, but I've not been very accurate. So I've clicked and I've drawn my first point a little bit away from the bottom. Before I let go of the mouse, what I can do is hold the spacebar key, and I can move the point on the screen and put it where I want to. Now I've moved my point. Now I can draw my curve coming out. So again, same up here. If I click and it's not in the right place, what I can do is hold the spacebar key and move it just by moving my mouse back to where I want it, and then I can adjust the curve. So that's quite handy. Instead of holding the Alt key now, in the Alt key, remember, gives me the chance to move this exit curve. What I'm going to do instead is hold the Control key. What that does is give me the ability to keep the control arms coming out at 180 degrees to each other, but I can change the length of the exit curve. So I'm just going to make that a little bit smaller, and then I can go back up to my other point. Another really handy tool or shortcut for using with the pen tool. Final one, on this upper curve at the moment, I didn't change my exit arm. So what I'm going to do is reset that point in the middle. And the way I do that is before I click my next point, I just click on the actual node in the middle there, and it takes away that exit arm, giving me the chance to redraw from scratch my next curve. So again, a really useful tool to be able to go back, click on it, and just reset your drawing point. I hope that all made sense. Again, whizzed through those pretty quick. The pen tool does take a little while to master, but when you get quick at it, with using your tools that we looked at earlier, you know, your space bar to pan around, your Alt and Zoom key to zoom in and out, and knowing those little shortcuts, you really will get much, much quicker at drawing around shapes for creating cut lines and things. So again, I've used this same lip image here. And what I've done, just to show you editing the control points for these nodes afterwards, is I've just drawn 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 points around these lips. Okay, so I didn't create curves. I've just drawn straight lines to 6 of the key points around these lips. And what I'm going to do now is hold down the pen tool and go to the anchor point tool. The shortcut for that one is Shift and C. What I'm going to do is, let's just make this line a bit thicker. Hopefully you guys can see that okay. Is I'm going to click on each node and I'm going to edit them after the fact. So I'm going to change the entry curve there. I'm going to hold Alt, the control key. Oh, it's not letting me do it. Sorry, I'm going to get that curve. I'm going to grab the entrance arm afterwards. I'm going to do the same over here and edit each curve to give me the shape of those lips. So instead of drawing all the way around, all I've done is select the key points and then tweak them afterwards. That's another quick and useful tool for when you're using the pen tool. And finally, this one's one where, let's just make the line thicker again. I've drawn all the way around the lips there, but what I could do if I wasn't happy with any of the lines is go back to my Convert Anchor Point tool. And if I zoom in, you can see where these anchor points are. And I can then move them by using my Direct Select tool, which is the white filled selection arrow up here. And I could move an individual point, or I could choose to change the control arms as well. So you can go back afterwards and just tweak your design to check that your points are in the right place, move them around, change the control points and the arms as well. So a few different options there for using the pen tool. And as I said, the quicker you get with it, the easier your life will be. You can get really good at drawing round shapes pretty quick and accurately as well by using those different tools. It does just take a little while, so stick with it and you will get much better at it. All right, so one more final thing that we're going to go through is vectorizing. So this is a really useful tool, again, for creating cut lines, because often what might happen is you receive bitmap images, pixelated images, and you need to vectorize them, either to convert them to a vector because you want to print them much bigger, or the quality is not good enough on your bitmap, or because you want to add a cut line to the edge of a bitmap image. So those are two of the key reasons that you might want to. So we're going to start off by looking at this image here. I'm just going to delete my gradient tool out of here, my color guide, and put the Pathfinder back where he was so that we've got a bit more screen space here. And I'm going to zoom in on these shapes. Now, these 6 badges that you can see on the screen are actually JPEGs. Okay, it's a JPEG of 6. You can see that it's a placed image that I've put into my document because it says at the top here, linked file labels.jpg. And if I zoom in, hopefully you guys can see there a bunch of pixels. So this is definitely not a vector image. There's lots of pixels. And so what I need to do is convert this to a vector, because then I can use the outline of my vector as a cut line. So that's going to be really useful for me. So in the top control bar up on my document here, by the way, if you don't have this control bar open at the top with all these little options on, you can go to Window, Control. So it's that tab there. And I've got Image Trace here as one of the options. If I just click it, it's going to go into a binary mode where it looks at that data and it says, is it black or is it white? And it will then create data in black and white according to whether it sees the color as being past a certain threshold or not. So if I just click on Image Trace, let's see what happens. It's just calculating. So what it's done is it's created the shapes, but we've actually lost that shape in the middle because it was below the threshold for being what the computer is seeing as being black. So what I could do now is click on this little icon at the top that says Image Trace Panel. And if I click on that, it opens up a dialog box. And I can use this dialog box, let's just pan out the way here, to change the threshold. So down here on this scale bar, it's got the threshold. And if I increase the threshold, what we should see is that middle image has come back because I've added it to the threshold. Okay, so at the moment we're in black and white mode and we were just playing around with the threshold. Let's see what happens if we make the threshold much higher. Okay, so it's seeing a bit more of the data. I don't know if you could see that change on your screens very well, but if we take it way down, what we should see is we'll probably, there we go, we lost all the data because it wasn't enough. So you can play with this threshold to try and bring in detail and colors and things as you go. So let's just put this back up to the top so that we've got all the data. And once I've done that, at the top here in that control panel again, I'm going to click on expand. That's going to create all of the different vector shapes for me. So now if we zoom in, you can see all the different vector shapes that have become available. Okay, so that was me vectorizing this, but I only did it in black and white. If you remember, the original design had a bit of color. So what I'm going to do is press Control Z, just go backwards. Back to the original image. It's going to take a while, just got to go past all those options that we just went through. Just Control Zing here to get back. A couple more. Oh, come on. There we go. So there's my image. Another option that you have is instead of clicking the default settings, if I go to the image trace bar at the top, but I click the drop down menu, it comes up with a few different options. Now in that image, I've actually got 4 colors because I've got 2 shades of gray, I've got that reddy pinky color, and then I've got the white background. But if I go to 3 colors as one of my presets, it's going to try and trace this by using 3 colors. So I'm probably going to get the 2 shades of gray or the red and the white. Let's just have a quick look. Just a moment, it's just calculating, a little bit slow here. Depending on the size of the image, this part might work quite slow on your computers. Okay, so it's actually gone with 1 shade of gray, the white background, and then the red shape. So again, if I go to expand, now it's kept the colors that were there. So if I ungroup the objects, or if you remember, if I double click, I go into isolation mode, I can now delete the white background, for example. And if I press escape to exit isolation mode, if I move these over here, you should be able to see the different colors and the different shapes that I had there. Now what I've done down here, just to move on, is I created the same image, but I saved it at a lower resolution. So if we zoom in, you can see that this is much, much lower resolution. And if I go back to my default image trace, what we'll see is that the result will not be as accurate. There we go. Can you see where we can't even see the text down here? Now that's because the original image was worse. So the vectorization tool is only going to be as good as the image data that you can give it. Sometimes it might be worth seeing if you can get a higher resolution image, or sometimes you just have to redraw what was there. But using this shape, this tool to vectorize, and then use the Pathfinder tool to merge your shapes, you can create outlines of existing shapes by vectorizing them, which is really useful. All right, next we're going to have a quick look at this image. So this is an image of a watch, and what we're going to do is try and create a cut line around the outside. I could use the pen tool, as you've already gone through, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually create a copy of this. So again, in my layers, what I'm going to do is select the image and go to copy, Control C. I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm going to turn off the existing layer, and on my new layer, I'm going to go to edit, paste in place. So that's got another copy of the image. And what I'm going to do is click on image trace. Now what I expect is going to happen is where these light reflective parts are on the watch dial, those are not going to go black. They're going to stay white. Right? It says it's a large image, so it's going to take a little while. So we'll just let it process. Yeah. So as you can see here, it has vectorized it, but it hasn't recognized these inside parts because they were white. So what I'm going to do again is go to the little dialog box and increase the threshold. Let's see if we can get a bit more of that image added. Yep, so it's adding more of the clock face here. There we go, that's looking pretty good. I don't think that we're going to be able to get all of the data. Let's have a look. We're getting a lot more. We can probably go all the way up. But now we're getting this bit of noise on the right-hand side. So I need to come back down a bit on the threshold. And I'm going to leave it at that. What I'm going to do is get rid of those internal white shapes. So I'm going to close my image trace box. I'm going to expand the image. And now these are all grouped as different shapes. So what I'm going to do, there's a couple of different ways of doing this. I'm just going to show you one way of doing it. Is to double click to enter that group to go into my isolation mode. So you can see at the top here, we're in the isolation mode. And what I can do then is select the white shape. And if I go to up here, select same fill color, I can then delete all of the white shapes. Or I can double click and just select the outline here. And what I'm going to do is cut that. So edit, cut. I'm going to delete all the rest of the data. And if we zoom out a minute and I go to edit, paste in place, I've just got my black outline now. What I'm going to do is swap the fill for the stroke, select the stroke and add a cut line and turn on my original image. And if we zoom in, what we should see is I've got a cut line going all the way around the outside of my shape, matching the image. Now it's not going to be 100% perfect. You can see down here, it hasn't quite got that little bit of detail in there, and it hasn't quite worked on this this knob on the side of the watch. But we can go in then using our pen tool or any of the other tools and edit that if we wanted to. It's just to tweak the outline to make it suit, but it's going to be probably a bit quicker than if you're not very good with the pen tool drawing around. So that's another way of using the vectorization tool within the software. And next up, I'm just going to show you a couple of the other options for the presets that are there within the vectorization sort of wizard. So if I select this image here, and if I vectorize this, it's going to be quite hard for me to isolate that car because there's lots of colors surrounding it. So if I try and isolate it, all of the other colors are going to vectorize as well. So if I just go to the original image trace, so the default one, let's have a quick look what happens. Yeah, you can see that it's really hard to see any parts of the car because it's just gone all dark and some of the light bits as well. So we're not actually getting much of the car. So we don't want to use that option. So I'm going to go Control Z. If I go to image trace here, what we could do is maybe go to something like 6 colors. Let's see what happens here. So what we're probably going to get is sort of green, a couple of browns and some blues. Because it's going to create that image, but only using 6 colors. So the vector shapes will be a lot more simple than the actual image. It's just taking a little while to process there on this computer. I'll have a sip of water whilst it's doing that. There we go. And if I click on expand, you can see the different vector shapes. So we've got sort of 2 gradients for the sky. We've got some green, and then 2 different browns. So again, that's not really ideal. It's quite a nice effect. Looks like a sort of posterization kind of effect, but it's all vector based. Let's come over here and let's have another go at this. So let's go to this time. Let's choose 16 colors. And we'll see what we get as a result. Again, this is going to take a little while. It's going to take a little while because this is quite a high-end image. So it's suggested that we rasterize the image. So let's do that because it's going to not take so long to process. Basically just sort of flattening the image to a lower grade. So 16 colors. Let's see how long this takes now. So hopefully it won't take quite as long. This time we're going to get a lot more shapes from our vector, but it's still not going to look just like the photograph did at the beginning. but again, you'd be using as much processing power as some of the other options we're going to look at. So still taking a while. There we go. So can we see the difference between the two side by side here? This one on the right hand side does start to look a bit more realistic because we've got a lot more tone in the shape. So if we zoom in, you can see we've got a couple of different shades of green highlights here on the wheel arch, on the bonnet as well, and we've got a bunch of different shapes within the brown as well. So it is starting to look a lot better as well. And then what we're going to do down here with this one is, again, I'm just going to rasterize it. And I'm going to choose a slightly lower resolution just because it will be a bit quicker for this next process. And what I'm going to do is now choose this option here that says high fidelity photo. This is going to create a lot of vector shapes, but it means that the actual vector result's going to look pretty similar to the photograph, but there's going to be loads and loads of little vector shapes. There's going to be lots of colors. This would take a lot longer on a bigger image, but it means that if you are going to be printing big scale images, you can use the vector version. Now, it just did that there. It just created the vector. I'm just trying to see if you guys can see on your screen. So now at the moment on the screen, let's just make that a bit smaller, is we've got a vector file on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side, we've got the photo. Now, at a distance, they look pretty similar. But if I zoom in on the vector version, and if I click on expand, what we'll see is lots and lots of vector lines. So you can see all these blue squiggles, all of those are vector lines. And if we zoom in, you can see the different shapes within that. So obviously this is a lot of data, but it would mean that what I could do as well is go round, for example, if I ungroup these, is I could go round with a selection tool and I could delete all the background. I'm not going to do it all. I'm just going to show you very quickly what I mean. So this way I could get a trace, an outline of the shape of my car a lot more easily by taking out different parts of the design. So I could use a selection tool to do that as well. So again, just another version of creating a vector from a car shape. All right, that is it for today. Hopefully a bunch of those tools have helped. I do have actually one more quick little poll let's ping up just to see about the vectorization. So there is another way of doing this. So if I did want to create the outline of that VW Beetle, what I could have done is jump over into Photoshop and erase all the background and then vectorize it. So it looks like a lot of you guys are using Photoshop as well. The two programs are meant to be used in conjunction with each other, so that what I would do in that example, looks like, yeah, sort of 75% of you are using Photoshop as well, which is great, is to be able to take that image over into Photoshop, erase a bunch of the data, which then makes the vectorization tool have a lot less work to do, because it can just vectorize the car and it's not looking at all of those different colors. So you probably get a much better result as well. Yeah, it looks like, well, about 70% of you seem to be doing that, which is great. So as I said, on this one, what I could have done is take away all the background, and then it would have been a lot quicker for me to edit that car. So what I can do is go at the top here and go to edit original, and I could open it in Photoshop. It will then link back into Illustrator and update the version that I have here as well. So that's something that would have worked quite well, is jumping between the two packages. So been going pretty quick and gone through quite a lot there. Hopefully some of that's been useful. If I did go too quick, don't worry, we will have this recording available for you to watch back and re-watch, and maybe pick up a few of the extra tips if you missed them. What we'll do now is we'll sort of finish the main webinar. Thanks for watching. However, we do have a bit of time for some question and answers. So if any of you have pinged any questions in throughout the session, just taking a look. No, it doesn't look like any of you asked any questions. You do have a little questions box on your screen there. So if any of you have any questions, we can hold on for a minute and try and answer some of those for you now. So do ask some questions if you have any, and I'll try and answer them to to the best that I can. They can be based around some of the functions that we've done today, or anything to do with Illustrator if you like as well. All right, let's just see if we've got any questions coming in. No questions at the minute. You must all be Illustrator wizards by now then. Oh, we've got a question coming, hold on. Just trying to find it on my screen over here. Is it the UV printing one that you saw there? Yep. So in what instances would you use gradients for UV printing? One of my favorite things to do would be to do that. What I've done before is created, I got a photograph of some water droplets. And then in order to create the sort of what a water droplet would actually look like, a little dome of liquid, I used a gradient to create that effect. So what I'm going to do quickly is just show you a couple of tools. So I'm going to use the blob brush tool here on the left-hand side, and I'm going to select my gloss spot color over here, and I'm going to create, oh, not quite big enough here, a blob shape. I'm going to make that, sorry, I'm going to make this blob a bit bigger size. Here we go. So I'm going to create a blob shape that I'm going to pretend to be, this is going to be my my water droplet, for example. So I'm just creating a quick shape here. This is another tool we haven't gone through, but this is called the blob brush tool. And let's just round that off a little bit more. There we go. We've got a nice blob. So this is going to be my water droplet. Now, what I would want to do in order to create a better gradient on this is soften those edges so that when I'm printing, I'm not going to get a sort of a box shape. I'm going to get a nice rounded edge on it. So this is at the moment solid gloss for UV. If I go to effects at the top here, I can create a gradient by also feathering the edge. There's a couple of different ways of doing it. Rather than creating the gradient on this one, I'm going to go to stylize and feather. And let's put a radius on the edge here. So let's go with 4 millimeters. All right, let's go 5. And if I zoom in on the edge here, you see how I've got a nice soft edge. That means that the edge of my gloss, when I print in multi-layers, so is going to have a nice curved edge as it gets bigger. The same on a gradient. If I did print, let's go back to my gradients tab here. If I did print this gradient here, but with gloss instead, so the way that I would do that is get my gradient tool back up, so gradient window. And if I grab the gloss tab out of here and I drag that onto the gradients and go from gloss, is this not, sorry, I'm on the stroke, that's why. Go to the fill, drag my gloss spot colors on to these two ends of my gradient. This gradient here is now going from 100% gloss to 0% gloss. So if I printed this with multiple layers on a UV device out of clear ink, for example, what I would actually get is, if we looked at it from the side, just make that blue, we'd get something like that out of clear ink, right? It would be 0% on one end, 100% on the other, lots of layers, and you get that nice gradient effect. So you can create textures and things using gradients for UV printing. And the same for white ink. You might want to create gradients out of white ink for having different percentages behind certain parts of a design or something like that. Hope that helps. Any other questions coming through?
There's one just above that from Laura, asking about popping bleed around the images of the logo text with the boxes that you have.
Yeah, that's tricky. Unfortunately, there's not an easy way of doing that. That is quite a common question. So in which example were we in? This one, I take it we were asking about adding a bleed to this. There isn't a way of getting it perfect that I know of in Illustrator. What I would normally do is add whatever color this design would be stuck onto, I would create a bleed of that color. So I would create a shape all the way around the outline. So we did this with our cut line. What I could do is copy my cut line, go to create a new layer and put it below the logo, turn off the other layers, paste in place, object, path, offset path, let's go with 1 millimeter, okay, and then fill that with whatever the background color would be. So you could choose one of the colors of the design, but I'd probably just go with like a gray or something, and then turn the other ones on. And then you've got a bleed, but it's not gonna, it won't match the design. There isn't a way of, for example, where this join is with your circle and the rectangle, there isn't a way of creating a split at an angle and then it doing it, because there just is, you know, it's not sort of physically possible, I guess, of creating a bleed around each bit. So you either choose one of the colors or you create a separate color and use that as a base layer. There isn't really a way of creating a gradient between them all. I hope that answers your question a little bit though. There you go. How can you create a spot color? Perfect. Yes, of course, we can talk through that one. So if you don't have the Roland VersaWorks swatches open, I will quickly show you how to open those first, and then I'll show you how to create your own as well. So in order to open this spot library here, this little swatch palette, which has got cut contour, white, gloss, metallic within it, you need to go onto the computer that has VersaWorks installed on it, and you go to, I just need to, sorry, just jump out of my screen sharing a minute here. So let's just jump into, go to C drive, program files. Then you need to go into VersaWorks and swatches and Illustrator. And in there, I've got my Roland VersaWorks swatch palette. I've also got some other swatch palettes. So I've got the Roland color library, texture libraries, and things like that. So you can open this into Illustrator by routing to this part from Illustrator. So you can go to your swatches palette, go to the little drop down menu and go to open swatch library, and then navigate to that route that I just showed you, which was C drive, program files, VersaWorks, swatches, Illustrator. Or what you can do is actually install them into the program files of Illustrator. So that's probably a better thing to do because you only need to do it once. So what I would do is grab my Roland VersaWorks swatches and copy that library. And next we're going to go into our C drive, but we're going to go into the program files for x86 for Adobe. Oh, nope, sorry. Back into program files, Adobe, Illustrator, presets, ENGB, swatches, and paste. Quite a long route to remember, I know, but that was C drive, program files, Adobe, Adobe Illustrator, presets, ENGB, swatches, paste. Watch that one back if you need to get that link back up. And once you've pasted them in here, what you can then do from VersaWorks is go to your swatches palette, open swatch library, and they'll be installed into Illustrator here. So you can just open them from here. So that's how I've got this swatch palette. If you don't have that swatch palette or you don't have VersaWorks installed on your computer, you can always create the spot color yourself. So again, if I just move these out of the way a minute, got quite a lot of windows open here. If I pull out this swatches palette so you guys can see, all you would need to do is go to the little drop down list and go to new swatch. This window will open up, and what you need to do then is for the swatch name, you put cut contour with capital C's and no spaces. So capital C UT, capital C ONTOUR has to be spelt correctly. Cut path also works. So with capital C and a capital P and no space between them. You then change the color type from process color to spot color because the spot color needs to be recognized by VersaWorks as having the cut information. And then the actual color doesn't matter. We tend to use a magenta as a default just because it stands out quite nicely. So you can change the color to magenta there if you want to. But the main bits you need is a new swatch called cut contour, a spot color, and that's it. That means you're now going to have spot color that you can use in VersaWorks. And if you do open up this Roland VersaWorks library, just a little hint as well, if you go to the little drop-down list and select persistent, that means that every time that you close Illustrator and reopen it, that palette will stay in your main panel screen, which can be really useful as well. So that's how you can create that cut contour. And whilst we were talking about the sort of layout of Illustrator there and how you can keep things within your main palette or your main document and your layout, what I tend to do is I have a specific way that I like those panels on the right-hand side to be laid out. So what I would then do is go to Window, Workspace, New Workspace, and you can then save your layout. So I've got my own workspace here called Joe. So if I go to Reset Joe, it's going to reset all my panels and all my layout and all my windows back to how I like to have them at the beginning, in case I've been moving them around a lot. Right, let's jump over to a couple more questions. We've got to be quick now. We're sort of running over quite a bit here. So for controlling the cut contour order, does it use the order in which the priorities are applied to the stroke? It depends on your printer a little bit. The newer printers do have an optimized cutting process, so they will cut the quickest way or the most logical way. Some of the older printers don't have that. So yes, it is built by how you've generated the data within Illustrator. Sorry, so your layer schemes, you can move them in your layers, and how the data was created, that will be the order that it was cut in. Let's just have a quick look if there's anything else. No, that looks like it. And that we are a little bit over time. Sorry, I've been babbling on, but hopefully that's been useful for you guys. There will be a quick little survey that will pop up at the end of the webinar if you don't mind filling that out. And if you do have any feedback, feel free to get in touch. But hopefully this session has been useful for you. Keep practicing. There's always loads to learn. Watch more tutorials online for helping you with your processes, because everybody's still learning in the end. Enjoy the rest of your day, and thanks for joining us.